I once knew the Lord Mayor of Manchester very well, and he said at one of his speeches, he started off by saying, I hope you can all hear me at the back. And somebody at the back said, no. And the man on the front row said, I'll change places with you.
And what better way of spending a rainy Tuesday morning than here? My favourite quote of all time is a journalist called Pete Clark, and he wrote, cubic inch for cubic inch, a good book is the best use of space on this planet. Isn't that great?
My first book, which is an example, which was A Time for Silence, was inspired by a cottage, which is, if you climb over the fence at the bottom of my garden and down a field, there's this ruined cottage down there. More ruined now than when I first saw it. When I first saw it, you could peer in and the woodworm steps were still up to the upper floor, which was sagging and about to fall, and there was an old rusting kettle in the big inglenook fireplace and things. It's all been cleared out now.
And I do remember the moment that I got the sort of light bulb idea for starting off the story. Now, the light bulb idea is when it goes from being a sort of vague idea in the back of your head that this would be a nice thing to do, and suddenly something goes flash, and you get the idea and you think, I've got to write that. It won't go away, and it won't let go of you.
And so the idea of the hill holding the secrets was where I started. Can we have the next one? So you can see at the top, it's just extraordinary lumps and bumps, really. So I started with the hill, next one, and then I thought, well, I can begin to see a face in there.
The best way to introduce how it all works to you is to plunge in at the deep end. So this is what we're going to do now. My long-suffering friend Jane here is going to be the dung beetle. Okay. You okay?
Yep.
Yeah, great. So with the help of my trusty microphone, which I always explain to children is a magic microphone, so that when it gets near your mouth, it automatically gets louder, like this. So it's a question of engaging imagination, really. We're going to run the interview then. Okay. Hello, I'm from the BBC, and I'd like to ask you a few questions. What's your name?
My name is Tifoeus, but you can call me Minotaur Dung Beetle.
And where do you live?
At the moment, I live in a heap of sheep droppings, but I might move soon.
Ah.
I said, are you ready to rock? And they went, yeah! And I said, this one's called The Girl from Ipanema. Anyway, they chucked us out. They chased us out, really.
And after 65, when we're supposed to be retired, seems to me we're jolly hale and hearty if we're lucky. And the world seems to be full of couples in their 70s and even 80s striding along Offa's Dyke. Have you seen them?
Right, and I think we've got to the stage judging by signals. I forgot to mention that I worked on local radio as well. I decided that I wanted to write scripts, but not a bit of it. They put me straight onto Problems Phone In. Because the producer said I had an avuncular chocolate voice.
I looked at the notice board, and one of those little sayings jumped out at me. Experience is what you get when you didn't get what you wanted. Now, for me, in many respects, and with the people I work with, that sums up life.
It was in 1948, long before the space race, that the astronomer Fred Hoyle said, once a picture of the Earth is returned from the outside, showing the whole of it, it will unleash an idea as big as any in history. And I think that's true.
Try and read a different poem every day for a year. And that's what I started off doing. Now, because I'm also a writer and things tend not to make sense to me unless I write them down, I started kind of keeping a journal. read a poem, write about it, write about what I did during the day, why I chose that poem. It was a snowy day, so I wanted a poem about ice and snow. There were daffodils out, so I wanted a poem about daffodils. I was feeling miserable, so I wanted an unhappy poem.
There are three times in history when one vote changed on, historically, the future. And one of those, I won't tell you the other two, but one of those was that when the Americans in 1776 or 77 met to decide what language this new nation was going to speak, English won by one vote. Anybody guess what the second one was? German, yeah.
Here we are, a melancholy fact, but I assure you it's true. Round the chapel at the Mid Wales, there are over 1,000 unmarked graves. And I know this because I've looked at the records. And you see, these would be patients who spent their lives there, many from up this way. No public transport after the railway closed down, and the last bus between Newtown and Brecon was in the early 70s, I think. So they didn't have their own cars. So, and anyway, they were out of sight, out of mind. And so they died lonely, and not about lonely, but unloved outside the institution, and they're buried outside the chapel.
Found out when I was 19 that actually there was sort of a revenge genocide against the ethnic Germans in that region. So actually, during World War II, with all the other horrible things going on, in northern Yugoslavia, Germans were being rounded up, put into death camps, fleeing. Both of my grandparents fled, spent years as refugees in Austria.
And it's a mansion, Llisagarn, which has a lot of history. It goes way back. And in that history are quite a few tragedies which have left their mark on the house. Marks that she can feel because she has this gift of being able to feel them. And it's, everybody might call it a gift, she calls it a curse. And she can't bear having to deal with these shadows in old houses.
In the 1980s, at the height of the Cold War, thousands of nuclear weapons were threatening life on Earth. Millions of people around the world were terrified into protest and civil resistance, and I was one such. I gravitated to Greenham like many other women in this country, where thousands of us were engaged in confronting the outdated, patriarchal, military-industrial complex.
Maybe the partisans were trees that came to life and whistled along to nursery rhymes. Her mouth hung open. Her whole chin was wet below her lips. The smoke was thicker and coming closer, a dark mass unfurling over the street. The sun had almost set in the west, but in the east, Chachensea glowed red as if a second sun were rising. Emma, her mother called from the kitchen window, "Get inside, hurry."
Resistance is private and personal. It is the quiet and unremarked daily rejection of all that degrades and debases. It is the silent and solemn persistence in not surrendering to the system. Resistance is keeping our inner vision clear and intact. Resistance is public and political. It confronts the bloody face of militarism and money, defies Moloch, pitiless idol of power and wealth, ever hungry for sacrifice for our children's blood.
In the 19th century, workmen were called in to deal with the draft. And when they removed some old panelling, they found the seated skeleton of a woman walled up behind it. Nobody knows why or who. There's no clue, no evidence whatsoever. Lots of theories. One theory is that the lady of the house in the early 17th century was the woman who betrayed the gunpowder plot. And as a punishment, her family walled her up.
Because I know people, maybe you know some too, who break into nuclear facilities, into Faz Lane. They break into places surrounded by fences and razor wire and motion sensors and CCTV and guards and dogs, and who are these people? I happen to know. For a start, they're nuns. Not ninja nuns, not SAS-trained nuns, just nuns. They break into all sorts of nuclear bases. They pour blood onto missile silos, which upsets military people no end. Nun blood, it freaks them out.
Across the centuries, literature abounds with references to mutton. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle mentioning it in 16 of his books, most enigmatically in one of the Sherlock Holmes.
It was while I was in the carriage, just as we reached the trainer's house, that the immense significance of the curried mutton occurred to me.
And then in the distance we saw this shimmering mirage of white. Thrilling, because what it was our film set. And it was the unit vehicles, it was the catering tents, it was all the stuff that was all around this hotel, flooding this little rather scruffy hotel. So we drove there and drove through this crowd of extras, well, around the crowd of extras, we didn't kill anyone.
My followers like a short book, action all the way, and no lengthy descriptions. They like action and a shorter book. And they also, and I have to say it, they like a fair bit of sex in it. So I have to cater for the sex, the gore, keep it short, and they'll buy it.
And then, as we walked through them, we found our lovely actors resting between takes. Maggie Smith, Judi Dench, wrong pickup, Bill Nye, lovely name, isn't it? Lovely name, like wind through corn, Bill Nye. So Bill Nye was there. And they were all sitting there, resting between takes with punker wallers holding umbrellas. And this was the wonderful moment. Judi Dench, or one of them, I think it was Judi Dench, they all got up with their knees cracking like pistons, embraced me, and one of them said the sentence that you long to hear but you never hear when you write a book and it's turned into a film, which is, "We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for your lovely book." Heaven. That was a high spot.
Why don't we? The other rappers are looking like babies. But look at me, I'm real middle-agey. I got hemorrhoids, I got a hernia. With my father figure lyrics, I can burn you. And when I holiday, a holiday saga. I wore my slippers up on the Arga. I smoke a pipe, I vote UKIP. I'm on a waiting list for my new hip. I like to moan about the state of the nation. I like to moan about me constipation. What's the iPhone? What's Twitter? Why does nothing happen when I'm sitting on the toilet? See my wheels driving old Morris Minor. See my hoe, she got a prolapsed vagina. We got liver spots, we wear dentures. Going to the bingo is a bit of an adventure. Calling out to the elderly rhymer, the one with early onset Alzheimer. Werther's Originals, our favourite sweeties. We can't eat them because we've got diabetes. Diabetes. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.